Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel Curiosity Box, and this video is all about the books I've collected since I started watching the Queen Victoria sort of drama, Victoria starring Jenna Coleman, and I am totally a Vic Bourne, on the side of Vic Bourne, total Vic Bourne fan and Vic Bourne shipper. So I have a few books here. I got some of them just before the series started, just because I was interested in reading up a bit. And then once we said goodbye to Lord Melbourne, I got some Melbourne books. So this is my collection. This isn't a full review yet because I haven't quite read them, but I've got quite a lot of reading to do. But this is the ones that I've got. So this one is very special. It's a children's story which is actually written and illustrated by Queen Victoria, and it's The Adventures of Alice Lascelles by Alexandrina Victoria, aged 10 3/4, and it's beautifully presented in this sort of cloth-bound book. So I'll read the back of the book. An enchanting children's story written by a real princess. Queen Victoria wrote this charming story about the adventures of Alice Lascelles and Miss Duncombe's School for Girls, and the mystery of who put the cat in Miss Duncombe's kitchen when she was just 10 3/4. This tiny gem in its little red notebook is now kept safe in the Royal Archives. It is published here for the very first time, and it is illustrated with characters created from Victoria's own collection of paper dolls, drawn for her by her governess, then delicately coloured in by Victoria herself. A delightful and unique children's story, which will still enchant and captivate every little princess today. So this is the cover. It's beautiful. It's very there's a bit about how they made the book. The illustrations in this book were created by 4 very different people. Firstly, Queen Victoria and her governess Baroness Lidson, and secondly, Christina Pierrepont and Felix Petrushka. Once she had read the story very carefully, Christina began designing the illustrations for it using a technique called etching. This is a traditional process of making prints from a metal plate. In this process, the plate is first covered with wax, and a special needle is used to scratch the drawing for the illustration onto the plate. The lines left by the needle will become the lines of the drawing. The plate is then covered in acid, which carves the lines of the drawing into the metal. The rest of the wax is cleaned off. Ink is pushed into the lines, and a sheet of paper is placed on the plate and run through a printing press. It's a very careful and painstaking process, and quite smelly and quite dangerous when the plate is sunk in its acid bath. Before she covered the sink plates with wax, Christina aged the plates by scrubbing them with a metal brush. She did this because she wanted the illustrations to look as if they had been made a long, long time ago, as long ago as when Victoria first wrote her story. You can see some of the scratches made by the scrubbing in the final illustrations. Queen Victoria's paper dolls were digitally cut out and manipulated by Felix Petrushka, whose job it was to bring the paper dolls to life. He did this by changing their poses and expressions, by adding shadows to give them a more three-dimensional appearance. The animated dolls were then set in their new home, Mrs. Duncombe's School for Girls, and the story was ready to begin. So there is an introduction by Jacqueline Wilson, which I will read out for you. When I was a little girl, I loved playing with paper dolls. My mother brought me paper doll cut-out books from toy shops, but these dolls were all too babyish to be inspiring. I preferred cutting out pictures of older girls and ladies in fashion pattern books. I'd give them all names and distinct personalities and play many elaborate imaginative games with them. I didn't have any male figures, so I couldn't divide my paper dolls up into families with fathers and brothers. My games were all set in boarding schools and orphanages for girls. Perhaps that's why I chose to write about Tracy Beaker when I grew up. My favourite of all my fictional heroines is Victorian Hetty Feather, who lives in a foundling hospital. I've always loved the Victorian age, so it was a treat writing about her. I was delighted and astonished to discover that the most famous of all Victorians, Queen Victoria herself, also loved paper dolls when she was a child. Her governess drew them for her, but the young Victoria coloured them in herself. I think you'll agree that she was very talented. Whenever I used my paint box as a child, I went over the lines and the colours bled into each other. I certainly couldn't manage sophisticated shading or attempt tiny patterns. Victoria wasn't just very skilled with her brushwork, she was an eloquent and inventive writer too. She wrote this delightful story when she was 10. Alice's stepmother doesn't like her and persuades her father to send her to boarding school. There's no mention of holidays. Alice has to stay away for 6 whole years. This is a sad storyline after my own heart. Victoria introduces us to each girl at the boarding school. They're a very interesting and varied bunch. I felt very sorry for little orphaned Ernestine and her unfortunate appearance, but my favourite of all the girls is naughty Diana, whose violent temper makes her behave in a most indecorous manner. There's an interesting plot about a kitten, and the tale ends happily, if a little hurriedly. Victoria was obviously keen to get to the end of her story. I know the feeling. If Victoria hadn't been destined to be queen, I think she might have made a remarkable novelist. I hope you enjoy her book. Jacqueline Wilson. So, it's gorgeous how they've done it. And you've got the in her own handwriting, to my dear Mamma, this, my first attempt at composition, is affectionately and dutifully inscribed by her affectionate daughter, Victoria. And this is the story. So this gorgeous book, I just would recommend it. The next book that I got is by Usborne, and it's Queen Victoria. And it's a little hardback book, and it's really nice because it has colourised pictures in. Victoria was only 18 when she became queen, but until that day she had been kept a virtual prisoner by her mother. This is the amazing story of her life, from her difficult and lonely childhood to becoming one of the most powerful women in the world. So it's a cute little book, and it's got some beautiful pictures in, and they've written black and white, and they've all been like colourised nicely. And there's the picture. And there are little pictures of Lord Melbourne in it, and there's a picture of the wedding here, and he's there at the wedding, and I think he looks a bit sad, perhaps he's marrying Albie. But this lovely little book, I think it's definitely worth getting. Well, I'm going to say that about all of the books, so I don't know if you want me to repeat that. No. So I went looking for some books about Lord Melbourne. So I found this one, and this is by the Leopold Classic Library, and what they do is they get some of the old text and put them in a new binding and sort of make it more accessible. Sir Leopold Classic Library, The Prime Ministers of Queen Victoria, Lord Melbourne, by Henry Dunkley and Stuart J. Reid. Leopold is delighted to publish this classic book as part of our extensive classic library collection. Many of the books in our collection have been out of print for decades and therefore have not been accessible to the general public. The aim of our publishing programme is to facilitate rapid access to this vast reservoir of literature, and our view is that this is a significant literary work which deserves to be brought back into print after many decades. The contents of the vast majority of titles in the Classic Library have been scanned from the original works. To ensure a high-quality product, each title has been meticulously hand-curated by our staff. This means that we have checked every single page in every title, making it highly unlikely that any material imperfections, such as poor picture quality, blurred or missing text, remain. When our staff observed such imperfections in the original work, these have either been repaired or the title has been excluded from the Leopold Classic Library catalogue. As part of our ongoing commitment to delivering value to the reader, within the book we have also provided you with a link to our website, where you may download a digital version of this work for free. Our philosophy has been guided by a desire to provide the reader with a book that is as close as possible to ownership of the original work. We hope that you will enjoy this wonderful classic work, and that for you it becomes an enriching experience. If you would like to learn more about the Leopold Classic Library collection, please visit our website, leopoldclassiclibrary.com. So this, I'll read the note bit. Note: the latest and most authentic materials for a biography of Lord Melbourne are to be found in Lord Melbourne's papers, edited by Lloyd C. Sanders, with a preface by the Earl Cowper KG, Longman's Green & Co., 1889. The volume was not published till after the following memoir was begun, but it has been of great assistance to the author. His acknowledgements are also due to Mr. W. M. Torrance, whose Memoirs of Lord Melbourne in 2 volumes, Macmillan & Co., 1878, furnish some information gathered from personal sources which is not to be found elsewhere. Sir Denis Le Marchand's Memoir of Lord Althorp, Lord Dalling's Life of Lord Palmerston, and Mr. Spencer Walpole's Life of Lord John Russell throw interesting sidelights on Lord Melbourne's career. The Greville Memoirs, it is almost needless to mention. The manuscripts of the Earl Cowper KG, preserved at Melbourne Hall and published by the Historical Manuscripts Commission 1888, supply ample notices of the Coke family. The author's thanks are due to F. J. Headlam, Esquire, who, as an old Etonian, kindly inquired of the Provost of Eton for any record or tradition of Lord Melbourne's school days, and to Professor Jack for similar inquiries made by him at Glasgow University. So, there aren't any pictures in this book, in this particular book, but I do have a book that's full of pictures. So I'll read you the contents of this book. Chapter 1, A New Patrician House, The Melbourne Ancestry, Melbourne Hall, Sir John Coke, Secretary of State and political scapegoat, his sons Puritan and Cavalier, a glimpse of Richard Baxter, Thomas Coke, Vice-Chamberlain and Court Exquisite, Swift to Stour, The Lambs of Southwell, Sir Matthew Lamb and Charlotte Coke, The Church and Lincoln's Inn, The blending of two patrimonies. Joint result, Sir Penistone Lamb, 1st Viscount Melbourne. Chapter 2. Early Years of Education. A Melbourne household, Sir Penistone and Parliament, the ambitions of a great lady, an Irish peerage, with princes of the blood, another vice-chamberlain in the family, the company at Melbourne House, William Lamb at Eton and Cambridge, a first flight and declamation, to be quoted by Fox, law and philosophy at Glasgow, home correspondence, Glasgow manners, the Miss Millers, Robert Hall's sermon, Lamb does not like the dissenters. Chapter 3. Waiting for the tide. Education finished, what next? Some disadvantages on setting out. Sauntering. Decides for the law, is called to the bar with his future Lord Chancellor. Lamb and Pepys, goes on circuit, actually gets a brief, a twofold crisis, falls in love, becomes an eldest son, a courtship not without sinister auguries, a double marriage and some maternal dreams fulfilled. Chapter 4. Political land surveying. William Lamb in Parliament, the men he found there, Pitt and Fox, family connections, Lord Althorp, William Huskisson, quick fate of all the talents, Lamb moves the address, a constitutional question raised, Lamb stands by the Constitution, veers towards administrative radicalism, the Duke of York scandal, the Regency, the rising sun will surely shine upon us, not at all, has no predilections, Lamb loses his seat and is adrift. Chapter 5. Troubles at Home. Lady Caroline Lamb, sinister auguries fulfilling themselves, advent of Lord Byron and Childe Harold, the flirtations of Lady Caroline, serio-comic, verging upon tragedy, William Lamb's conjugal ruminations, marriage of Lord Byron and its results at Brocket, waywardness or madness, a separation planned and frustrated, the future Lord Lytton a sacrificial victim, separation at last, a psalm of life. Chapter 6. A follower of Mr. Canning. Again in Parliament. Influence of Huskisson. The charm of Canning. Lamb a convert, but does not leave his party and sometimes votes with it. Votes for a committee of inquiry into the public expenditure. Speaks in favour of a reduction of expenditure. Votes for the suspension of habeas corpus and for the 6 Acts. Opposed parliamentary reform. The Catholic Association. Queen Caroline, impecuniosity. A philosophy of credit. Proclaimed a political renegade and out once more. Chapter 7. Chief Secretary for Ireland. Sudden turn of the political kaleidoscope. Canning in power. The Whig party rent asunder. Lamb Chief Secretary for Ireland and seat found for him. Leaves for Ireland. Death of Canning. Lamb's Irish achievements and experiences. Retains office under the Duke of Wellington and pays dearly for it. The Whigs cleared out. Huskisson's resignation and its consequences. Lamb succeeds with the rest of the Canningites. Death of Viscount Melbourne. Chapter 8. At the Home Office. Lamb, now Viscount Melbourne, in the House of Lords. Catholic emancipation. Death of George Hornby, publisher, Revenue Bills. The administration on the Shoals. A revolution in Paris, and a threatened one at home. The Duke is afraid to visit the city. The Canningites declare for parliamentary reform, and prepare to join the Whigs. Melbourne moves with them, but slowly. Earl Grey in power. Melbourne Home Secretary. The Reform Bill. Melbourne's mind quite made up. Whig at the Home Office. Mr. Thomas Young and Mr. Francis Place. Chapter 9. Premier. Further work at the Home Office. State of the country. Earl Grey's apprehensions. Melbourne will have no repressive measures. The Dorchester labourers. Robert Owen. Irish policy of the government. Glowing dissensions in the cabinet. The passing of the Reform Bill has severed the bond of union. O'Connell and the Rupert of debate. Proposed secularisation of church property in Ireland. Johnny upsets the coach. Earl Grey resigns. Melbourne accepts the premiership. Chapter X. Translate that to Roman numerals, because it's all about numerals and I've got my story. Ego a rex mu. I don't know how to say it. Difficulties of office. The pranks of Lord Brougham. It's probably pronounced another way. Lord Althorp goes to the House of Lords. Melbourne's letter to the King. His interview with the King at Brighton. Summarily dismissed. Sir Robert Peel sent for. Failure of an unconstitutional experiment. Melbourne avenged. Premier again. How he manages the King. Lord Brougham disposed of Mrs. Norton. A second social. Lord Brougham disposed of Mrs. Norton, a second social misadventure. Hostility of the Lords. Lord John's finality. Radical discontent. Death of the King. Chapter X. 1. XI. Regius Professor. The Queen's accession. Peculiarities of the new reign. A youthful sovereign. Guidance and instruction needed. Lord Melbourne undertakes the task. How he discharged it. His devotion and self-denial. Melbourne and Baron Stockmar. The coronation. The court and the wigs. The bedchamber squabble. Chivalry and office. Melbourne's church patronage. The deanery of Exeter. Arnold and Thirlwall at court with Robert Owen. Chapter X11. His fall. Growing weakness of the cabinet. Instance of a protracted dissolution. Canada. The Syrian question. Palmerston's autocracy and foreign affairs. Melbourne keeps the peace. The Queen's marriage. His fatherly approval. The troubles of the ministry thicken. Embarrassed finance. The corn laws. Defeat on the sugar duties. A general election. A majority of 91. Melbourne resigns. His parting interview with the Queen. Chapter X11. Brocket. A speech at Melbourne. Brocket reminiscences. Augustus Lamb. Lord Egremont. A picture in the great saloon. Not left in utter loneliness. His interest in politics. Again in the House of Lords. A Windsor incident. Still ready to go if sent for. His health steadily declining. Not included in the ministerial combination of 1846. His last vote by proxy. An episode of 1832. The end. Oh, I wish he'd married Lord Melbourne. That would have been so much better. But the next book that I have is this one, and it's Heart of the Queen, Queen Victoria's Romantic Attachments, and it's by Theo Aronson. It is with this, there's another bit, there's a quote bit. My nature, wrote Queen Victoria, is too passionate, my emotions too fervent, and I am a person who has to cling to someone in order to find peace and comfort. It is with this aspect of the Queen's complex character that Theo Aronson's new study is concerned, for never, not even in old age, was Queen Victoria the dour, censorious Puritan of popular imagination. Within that dumpy, uncompromising-looking figure beat a very susceptible heart. She had, and again the words are her own, very violent feelings of affection. To Queen Victoria, the love no less than the guidance, attention, and protection of a man was all but indispensable. In the course of her long life there were 6 men with whom her emotions were romantically involved. There were her first Prime Minister, the urbane Lord Melbourne, her husband, the idealistic Prince Albert, her fellow sovereign, the fascinating Napoleon III, her gilly, the rough-hewn John Brown, another Prime Minister, the silver-tongued Disraeli, and her Indian servant, the exotic Munshi. The appeal to Queen Victoria of these 6 apparently disparate characters was that they were men of distinctive personality. There was something exceptional, something ultra, about each of them, and they all, and this was probably their greatest attraction in the eyes of Queen Victoria, treated her as a woman first, a queen second. By focusing on the Queen's romantic associations, and by making full use of recently revealed material, Theo Aronson has painted a fresh, intriguing, and startlingly different portrait of Queen Victoria. With his talent for narrative and characterization, he has produced one of the most incisive and readable of his many royal biographies. So that's one of the ones I'm currently reading. This next one is actually the book that the new series Victoria is based on. It is Victoria Alive by A.N. Wilson, and Daisy Goodwin has a quote on the front: effervescent, interesting, and original. A.N. Wilson's exhaustively researched and definitive biography includes a wealth of new material from previously unseen sources to show us Queen Victoria as she's never been seen before. It explores the curious set of circumstances that led to Victoria's coronation, her strange and isolated childhood, her passionate marriage, Prince Albert's pivotal influence, her widowhood and friendship with John Brown. Victoria is a towering achievement, a masterpiece of biography by a writer at the height of his powers. So that's really good, and this is another one that I'm currently reading. And I've got this one, Queen Victoria, A Life of Contradictions by Matthew Dennison. Queen Victoria is Britain's Queen of Contradictions. In her combination of regal vehemence and wifely submission, deep sentimentality and bombast, she became a spirit of the age to which she gave her name. This short, incisive book offers compelling assessment of her complicated and mercurial character, her relationships with politicians, and her reinvention of the monarchy. It is written with the irony, flourish, and insight that this queen and her rule so richly deserve. So that's what that book has. I really like the cover too. And it does have some pictures. These next 2 books, we go back to called Melbourne, and this is Melbourne by Philip Ziegler. Of all the public men I have ever known, wrote Lord Campbell, himself an active politician for nearly half a century, Lord Melbourne was approached with the greatest pleasure and satisfaction. He seemed to have no reserves, to make everyone his confidant. Opinions may differ as to who was our greatest Prime Minister, but when it comes to charm, Melbourne, like the Speaker of the House of Commons, has traditionally been returned unopposed. No other Prime Minister has come near him. This new biography, based on hitherto unused material of the first importance, does not detract from that reputation. Rather, it deepens and extends our understanding of a character essentially subtle and nuanced. Philip Ziegler's researches amongst the Royal Archives and other rich collections have produced much that is new and fascinating, including a large fragment of autobiography written when Melbourne was out of office. It is extraordinary enough that Queen Victoria's first Prime Minister should have been dragged through the courts by an aggrieved husband not once but twice. The new light that Mr. Ziegler throws on the affair with Lady Brandon makes the story even stranger. Over the notorious affair between his own wife, Lady Caroline Lamb, and Lord Byron, Mr. Ziegler gives good ground for thinking that the revolts were not so exclusively one-sided as has generally been supposed. The tone of the Whig party in its Indian summer, cheerful, flippant, coarse, zest of life at Holland House, the exuberance of Lord Palmerston, first the lover and then the husband of Melbourne's sister, come before us in all their vitality. The courts of George Godby and his brother William, the brave new world of Victoria, in which Melbourne doubled the roles of Prospero and Ferdinand, are vividly recreated. But it is on Melbourne the statesman that this book turns the most searching light. Its conclusions differ markedly from any preceding account, and are likely to stand the test of time. Mr. Ziegler has not only been diligent in research, but has thought long and hard about what he has found. The result is a biography that will take its place among the most distinguished lives of 19th century statesmen. So there is a contents page which I should read out. The child, the student, a way to make, an exaggerated woman, the doldrums, Ireland, Lady Brandon, the end of the Huskissonians, Captain Swing, the years of the Reform Bill, the Irish and the Unions, Prime Minister, Peel's 100 Days, Master in his own house, Church and State, the threat of passion, fretted by opposition, Protector Somerset, the Queen's First Minister, the stationary system, bedchamber treason and plot, playing out time, Eastern crisis, decline and fall, the race of glory won, and the appendixes are Appendix 1, Melbourne's first cabinet, Appendix 2, Melbourne's second cabinet. Forward. Oh wait, there are illustrations. These are the illustrations. First, Viscount Melbourne, Lady Melbourne with her father, William and George Lamb as infants, William Lamb at Eton, Emily Lamb, Lady Caroline Lamb, Rocket Hall, Melbourne Hall, Caroline, William and Augustus Lamb, William Lamb by Lawrence, Mrs. Norton, cartoons by John Doyle, Lord Grey, Lord Brougham, Lord Palmerston and Lord John Russell, the First Council, Riding with the Queen, Frederick Lamb, cartoon The Diner Out, Lord Melbourne by Landseer. Forward. Melbourne is already the subject of one of the most delightful biographies of our age. Why then write another? For one thing, it is nearly 30 years since Lord David Cecil completed his biography, nearly 40 since he published the first volume. I have been able to consult many papers which for one reason or another were not then available. On the political side, the most relevant are probably those of Lord Brougham and Edward Ellice of Earl Grey and his son Lord Howick. On the personal side, I have had the great good fortune to stumble on 25,000 words or so of Melbourne's autobiography, as well as a massive series of letters to and from Lady Brandon and from Mrs. Norton. But more important even than this is the fact that my understanding of Melbourne differs sharply from that of Lord David. When I first read Lord M. many years ago, I could not understand how a man so insouciant, detached, and free from ambition could have held together a cabinet of warring prima donnas over 7 such difficult years. I still do not think he could have. I agree with Lord David that Melbourne as a friend or relative must have been one of the most delightful, wise, and entertaining of men. But in public life I believe him also to have been ambitious, cynical, and almost wholly without political principle. He was, in short, much less of a carefree amateur, much more of a politician. Every biographer, perhaps to some extent, is a victim of his generation and of his prejudices. If so, Lord David has enjoyed incomparably the happier lot, but almost regretfully I fear that I am right. So this should be interesting, and there's lots of lovely pictures. Lots of pictures. There's these really cute baby pictures. And this is Melbourne, quite a fox at university. Well, even younger than that, I think. He's at Eton. So that's him at Eton. It's quite fit. So there's a lovely picture of him on the front. Very fit. And then I've got this book, which is the one that Forward was mentioning. It's The Young Melbourne and Lord M by David Cecil. So it's got Young Melbourne, and then here's David Cecil's classic biographies of the young Melbourne and the story of his marriage with Lady Caroline Lamb and Lord M, or the later life of Lord Melbourne, are here published in a single volume, as the author had always intended. Melbourne, who lived from 1779 to 1848, was one of the most curious and charming personalities in England's history. As Victoria's first Prime Minister and father figure, he was responsible for introducing the young Queen to public life. He was also one of the great masters of the art of conversation, and thus a wonderful subject for the biographer, an established classic that brings Melbourne and his whole period to life. So, the contents in this book: Part 1, the formative period, the Lamb family, the beau monde. Part 2, love, marriage, the House of Commons, Byron, frustration. Part 3, the finished product, 10 years later, the finished product. Part 4, the years of influence, in office, Mrs. Norton, after reform, Prime Minister, the Queen first phase, the Queen second phase, last year's list of authorities and index. Chief events: 1779, birth of William Lamb. 1785, birth of Caroline Ponsonby. 1790, William goes to Eton. 1796, William goes to Cambridge. 1799, William takes his degree. William goes to Glasgow to study. 1804, William admitted to the bar. 1805, Peniston Lamb dies. William marries Caroline Ponsonby. 1806. William, MP for Leominster. 1807. Augustus Lamb born. 1812. Caroline Lamb meets Byron. William retires from Parliament. 1813. Lady Heathcote's ball. 1815. The Lambs visit Brussels and Paris. 1816. William, MP for Northampton. Glenarvan published. 1819. William, MP for Hertford. 1825. William separates from Caroline. 1826. William retires from his Hertford seat. 1827. William Lamb becomes Chief Secretary for Ireland. 1828. Death of the first Lord Melbourne. Death of Lady Caroline Lamb. Melbourne's resignation from the government. 1830. Melbourne becomes Home Secretary. Melbourne meets Mrs. Norton. 1832. Passing of the Reform Bill. 1834. Trial of the Dorset labourers. Prime Minister. 1834. Melbourne's government dismissed by William Wandry. 1835. Melbourne becomes Prime Minister for the second time. 1836. Melbourne cited by Norton in his action against Mrs. Norton. Death of Augustus Lamb. 1837. Accession of Queen Victoria. 1838. Lord Durham in Canada. 1839. Crisis over the bedchamber question. Queen Victoria engaged to Prince Albert. 1840. Marriage of Queen Victoria. Syrian crisis. 1841. Fall of the Melbourne government. 1842. Melbourne has a stroke. 1848. Death of Melbourne. She's so should have married. So this one does not have any pictures. No pictures at all in this one. So if you mainly are after pictures, then this is the best one I've found so far. So that is my Queen Victoria and Lord Melbourne book collection so far. There may be lots more. So I hope you have enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.